Good morning. We are here with Rita Scroggin, and she's going to talk to us about Firstboardio. Rita, what is Firstboardio?
Well, first of all, thank you, Mike, for having me here this morning. Firstboard.io is an initiative or, an approach to get more women on private tech company boards. So we're focusing only on technology, and we're working together as a collective, leveraging each other's network. And we started in January of 22. I'm sorry, 2020. Sometimes the years
we've all been in lockdown. We get it.
Blend together, right? And so we're about a year in now, and we had some early successes, and I think we are off to a very good start.
So we've all seen the numbers and how underrepresented women are on the boards, but do you know some of those numbers, or can you speak to that? I'm assuming that was sort of what led you to form this organization.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of documentation about public companies and what those numbers look like. For private companies, the numbers are a little bit more, unknown. But there was a study in 2019, and that study, looked at private companies and came up with a conclusion that only 7% of board seats in those private companies are held by women. And so it's a well understood problem, I think, that, particularly in technology, in particular in private technology companies, there are very few women on the company boards. There are also very few women who are venture capitalists and very few women who get funded. So it's sort of a problem which kind of one leads to another. And I believe, changing the dynamics on the board level will be a contributing factor to giving more opportunity overall to more women in leadership roles, and ultimately, hopefully, also in the venture capital community.
I actually believe that I read recently that those numbers have actually gotten worse during COVID. That this year has been or 2020 was a particularly low year for female founders and getting funding.
Yeah.
That number was somewhere in the neighborhood of around 4%.
Yeah, it's a very low number, and I think the number for particularly African American women who are founders, the number is under 1%. So it is a very dismissal number, and a lot of work needs to be done on that front too.
So how do you counter the argument? I remember when I was back at, in venture capital, and we had these discussions, and, the people are like, oh, you should support, women-owned businesses. And, the pushback from, the seasoned venture capitalists, the old guys, who were typically old white guys, was always, we don't look at that. We're always just funding, the best company. And that, so how do you respond to that sort of defense that, like, that shouldn't matter. We only, we're funding the best of the best and whoever it happens to be. But clearly, that means that, we're not seeing funding for women and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that has been discussed a lot, and I hear that argument. But I think the problem is that oftentimes there's sort of this term pattern recognition, right? So since a lot of VCs are men, and then they see other men pitching an idea, and they think that there's a pattern they recognize, and therefore they perhaps feel that there's more security in funding that company over a company where they're not so familiar with the pattern or the founder. So I think that's part of the problem. And the other problem, I think, is that women are not really in the network. Because oftentimes I think there are some connections, somebody, I mean, I've heard VCs say, hey, if we don't know anybody, who is connected to those founders, we won't even look at the deal.
Sure.
So I think it's a big problem is that the networks don't really associate to the degree they could. And that's actually part of what we're doing at Firstboardio, to bring the women who have been, technology operating leaders. They have been part of multiple IPOs, acquisitions, and have scaled companies, to hundreds of $billions of revenue, and they're not being considered, for board roles. So we're trying to move the needle and basically, create a platform for our founding members to be visible and to become part of the network. To that, I mean, just yesterday we had a press release come out about one of our board placements, and it got a lot of attention. And I think it's a good example, a manifestation of, you know, how we're focusing on technology expertise first, and and then of course our gender equality going hand in hand with it. But
I
so
mean,
this particular, yeah.
I would say the irony is that study after study has shown that when a woman is leading the company outperforms their male counterparts.
Yeah, that's the crazy part about it, right?
So
Yeah.
it's like, you know, like study after study has demonstrated that it makes sense to have women in leadership, and yet we seem to disregard it when we, you know, when we're going after these candidates.
Well, last decade was a lot about, I mean, a lot of money was invested in from the venture capital community into startups. And some of these startups had amazing exits, but a lot of the startups also failed.
That's
The
venture
majority,
capital, though, right?
right? I mean, the majority of the
But that's the model. It's
companies,
supposed to work that way. It's high risk.
it's high risk, but I mean, I'm sure you've heard about the Kaufman report, you know, a few years ago, which talked about that, you know, as an industry, the venture capital is actually not super successful. But there are, of course, you know, a few really amazing exits, and we have seen several of those in the last few years, which make up, you know, for all the, you know, failed investments. But I believe that, you know, if more emphasis would be kind of, you know, put on maybe operating expertise and executing early versus, hey, let's just go like crazy and see where it goes, that maybe not so many companies would fail, and it would include, you know, a larger, you know, share of the population, women, people of color, who would have a chance to participate in, you know, in technology and in the success of technology, really.
So, you know, it also sounds like there's a potential chicken and egg problem, right? Is it more important to get the, you know, the female founders, or is it more important to get women in venture capital because they're the decision makers?
Well, I think it's both, right? I mean, you want to get more women in all the key roles. You want to get more women in venture capital, more women on company boards, and more women in leadership roles. So I think there's not so much and more women getting funded. So I think it is all of it.
And what has been the reception to First Board from venture capitalists and, you know, people that are making those types of hiring decisions or placement decisions on boards?
Yeah, I mean, as I said,
how are they received it?
I mean, we had some early successes, which is really fantastic. So, you know, 4 of our board members, of our Firstboardio members, have joined a board out of 32. So I think it's quite a high percentage. Okay. 2 of those were curated by Firstboardio. And we have talked to a number of venture capital firms. And in general, I think, you know, a lot of firms are on board and say, yes, we believe in the idea and we need to do something about it. We do have a number of supporters and partners, and that's men and women. And that includes, for example, Steve Singh, who is a managing director at Madrona, which is one of the prominent VC firms in Seattle. Mm-hmm. We have Rohini Chakrabarti. She is a partner at NGP Capital. And you know, a number of other, you know, VCs for, you know, primarily, you know, smaller firms. We have not been able to crack the code with the Sequoias of the world, but that's the goal for 2021. So I think we have an initial very positive reaction, and we need to build upon, you know, the momentum we have established so far. I mean, keep in mind, we're just only a year old, and but we have, I think, laid a very strong foundation.
And what, you know, what does the program offer to help prepare these individuals for these new roles?
We don't do that. We focus only on results. We only focus on basically connecting our founding members with open board seats. There are a number of other organizations who focus, you know, more on coaching and preparing women to be on a board. There are universities who offer classes, etc. So, so they're all doing really, really great work, right? But we feel that, you know, our approach is better being very, very narrow focused on technology only, and not, you know, all kinds of boards, and only on really focusing on results.
And do you pick the members, or do the members come to you? What is the selection process?
Well, so far it's really been word of mouth, and by design, the group is supposed to be a small group because we're working together. So it's not a large networking organization where we have hundreds of members, and it's not never will be that way. So at the moment we have 50 members, that includes me, and we want to really kind of get to know each other, work together, almost like a company, and then add members, as we grow and as we have laid a foundation. But again, it will always be limited, because we don't want to be just another networking organization. We also don't charge the members. A lot of the other organizations do charge the women. We do charge the companies who decide to work with us, but not the members. It's also a key difference.
And these members, are they running companies? What is the typical profile of a member?
Some of them are running companies. Some of them are founders and CEOs. A lot, and others are, running a function, have owned a function, whether it might be marketing, it might be operations, it might be product management or engineering. Most of our members have presented to a board. Several of our members have P&L responsibility, and have been instrumental in, in IPOs, as I said earlier, and in many acquisitions. So they bring, but what they bring to the table is really, deep technology expertise, understanding of the ecosystem in a particular domain, and they bring scale to the table.
And any particular vertical within tech, or just tech in general?
Well, we have a cluster of women who have been in B2B, enterprise software, cloud, security, DevOps, developer. So we're kind of predominantly in that space. There are a few members who might be a little bit outside of that. We have one member who's sort of our liaison between technology and biotech. But that's sort of the cluster.
And just to sort of step back a little bit, you launched this organization at the beginning of 2020. And then for those of you who haven't been paying attention, there's been this thing called COVID come along. How did that impact what you were trying to do, and how did it shift your model? Because, I'm assuming that initially you were meeting in person.
Yeah, so we had one meeting in person, and we had, in the year before, we had a sort of social dinner in November of 2019, and everything else has been virtual since then. We also have, initially the idea was to have women who are based, members who are only based in the Bay Area, but we've expanded from that. So now we have members in different locations. We have a member in Seattle, in Boston, in Denver, in Dallas, and of course, several members in the Bay Area. So we have kind of expanded, that idea, and are now more distributed throughout the country, which is kind of a reflection what's happening throughout, COVID and technology, that it isn't so localized anymore. And you can be in other locations and still participate in that whole, ecosystem of technology.
And, so the other thing that we're seeing in the news and that we're hearing is this exodus, right, from the Bay Area. Right. Is that real? Is it, what's going on there? Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I've certainly heard, or I know some people who have moved, since COVID, but I also know a lot of people who are still here. And I think a lot of people in my network, this will probably stay here, right? I mean, at the moment, a lot of things are unknown, right? When COVID, and when we're past it, will people go back in the office, to what degree? So I think at the moment, there's a lot of kind of wait and see. And then the question is sort of, where's everybody moving to? And I've heard places like Idaho. I've heard places like, of course, Portland, Seattle, Texas, Austin is a lot, in the news. Yeah, Austin for sure. Raleigh, North Carolina. So, I mean, or Connecticut, right? People who are on the East Coast, they're looking at Connecticut and places like that. But I would say, I don't think that Silicon Valley is going to be dismantled anytime soon. That's my opinion, right? Yeah.
I mean, but those cities, they've always had activities. I mean, they're not
Yeah.
Silicon Valley, but we've, you know,
Right.
Raleigh's got the Research Triangle. Austin's been, you know, a hot tech scene for a long time. I mean, they're sort of the second tier sort of venture capital cities, right, that have
Right.
existed.
Right.
And, you know,
And now
they're
they
just a
have,
little more
yeah,
attractive because, you
yeah,
know, the rent's reasonable and stuff like that.
yeah, and no income tax potentially in some states, right?
Right.
Or a reduced income tax. So there's some other considerations. And I think, you know, for the first time, because of COVID and remote work, people could do that. Before, you know, if they wanted to have a really great career, it meant you had to be pretty much in Silicon Valley, right? Or maybe in Seattle. And now there are more options. For example, Idaho, I think, is more on the radar, but I don't think it's a mass movement, right? I mean, for some people it works, but at the moment, I think Silicon Valley, I think, will continue to be the hub. And we have the universities here, we have the venture capital firms here, and I think that will still be a driving factor. But, you know, the world is changing, and it will be interesting to see how it will be in a year or two from now and long term.
You know, and the other thing is, you know, I'm guessing that networking has changed, right? You know, our previous idea of networking was getting together, spending time
Right.
together, in person, face to face. You know, let's sit down, let's have coffee, let's have a drink, let's meet each other face to face. Can you still get that same connection over a Zoom channel? We're doing okay,
Well,
but you know, the rest of us.
right. Well, I think that is challenging, right? Because that sort of social chatter is harder to do, I think, in a group setting on Zoom. I mean, there are companies like Hopin who are trying to stimulate an experience like that, and I think that's a good start. I could see if a technology company comes up with an experience which, you know, creates the experience of being in the same room, that would be a license to print money, in my opinion.
VR network, right? Well, like you
Virtual
feel
reality
like we're all sitting at
networking.
the same table, right?
Yeah, and it's probably going to be possible. I mean, I can see in 5 years or so, this might be an experience we're all going to have. But at the moment, you know, we still have, you know, it's pretty black and white. We have either virtual meetings like Zoom and maybe Hopin, and then we have face to face. And I think everybody is really looking forward to meeting face to face again. And at Firstboardio, I mean, we're hoping that in the fall we can do a big event where we invite all the members, of course, and all the supporters and our clients and anybody who, you know, has, you know, an interest in this topic and would like to get to know the community. I mean, we're planning, you know, for an in-person event as well, you know, pending the COVID situation, of course. So I think in person will come back, but maybe in a different form, right? And we'll have to kind of all experiment what that form will look like.
You know, it's interesting. I was speaking with someone yesterday, and you know, we were talking about networking, and she says, you know what, I have gotten 5 hours a day back to, you know, she was a parent, so between, you know, going back and forth to school and dropping off her kids, and then running off to networking meetings, she says, you know, I have 5 more hours in the day because I'm not in the car.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, that's a really good point, right? And I spoke to somebody else. She's an executive at a large company and has been traveling all over the world. Now she's not traveling. She said for the first time in many, many years, she stepped out in her backyard and looked at what's actually growing there, right? She had no idea. So yeah, so people have gained time back. So I think, you know, the future is probably in some sort of hybrid.
Yeah,
I
they're
don't
not going
think
to want to go back to that.
I don't think anybody wants to go back to commuting, you know, an hour and a half for 20 miles each way. So I think
You're talking about the one-on-one. I take it.
One-on-one is a good example of that,
Right, exactly.
right? Yeah, right. So I think, you know, we will see a change, but of course nobody knows yet how it will look like. And I think by the end of this year, we'll know a lot better what what the future of work will most likely, you know, be like.
And I know you mentioned the fall event, but what are some of the other things that you are hoping to accomplish in the next year or so?
Well, we really want to accomplish. Really want to get more visibility, right? So we want to get Firstboardio really on the radar, in front of, you know, every VC firm, every private equity firm, and hopefully in front of, you know, most of the CEOs of tech companies. That's a tall order, and but if we only accomplish it, you know, to a degree, I'll be very happy with that too. And we got a great, you know, so press release we just released yesterday or the day before, got a lot of attention and visibility throughout. And I think now we're planning a PR campaign. We're going to talk about, you know, the top 50 women of Firstboardio and what they bring to the table. So I'm very confident that we will gain visibility, for our collective and really get in front of people.
And is there an expectation that you'll see chapters in other cities?
We don't, that's an open question. One of our members who is located in Seattle, and she's very well connected in the Seattle ecosystem. Sorry, that was my dog. Uh-oh.
All good?
All good, yeah. Sometimes he
Good.
gets a little sick. Yeah, that's the life of how we all live right now, right?
Yeah.
Dogs and kids being part of our world here. So we have one member who lives in Seattle, and she's very well connected in the Seattle tech ecosystem, and she will be sort of, being the chair for our Seattle community. So that is an idea, and we might build out, certain locations a little bit more, but we have to kind of figure out how to do it. So to be determined. But yeah.
Okay. And where can they learn more? So we will include below, we will include the links to the press release and some of the other information, but where can they, if someone is interested, where can they learn more?
The best place probably right now is to go to our website, firstboard.io. It will give an overview about, what we're all about. Our members are visible on the website, so anybody can see who's part of our group. We also have a news page on our firstboard.io website where we, any kind of news we have will be updated on that site. So I think that's a good place. And then also, follow us on our LinkedIn firstboard.io page. That will also have updates about our news. So I think those are some really good places to get started.
Great. Well, it is always a pleasure to speak with you, and it has been way too long. I look forward to
Mike. Yeah.
It has. I look forward to seeing you in person and reconnecting. I will add some of those links in the text below so that folks can find those resources. Again, I very much appreciate you taking the time this morning to speak with us. I wish you well. I wish you great success with the First Board initiative, and I hope to speak to you soon. Thank you.
Mike, thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and I can't wait to get together in person, and I hope that you will join our event in the fall.
Well, I'm not sure I'll be back by then. I don't know if they'll let me in the country, but we'll work on it.
Okay, awesome. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.